Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some adorable seasonal cards using the Whimsical Wheels collection from Hero Arts. This is the Beep Beep die set. This is the base die. And then we have the Beep Beep holiday die to turn the base one into a Christmas themed die set with lots of different options there. We also have the Beep Beep leaf peeper die set, again, to change that base die into an autumn themed die set. We also have two different sentiment sets, press and foil and cut sets. This is the fall words as well as the winter words, and each one of those sets has lots of different options in there to pick and choose from, and those can be used in either the Glimmer system or the Letterpress system. I'm going to start off by doing my sentiments first so that I have them ready to go. I'm going to be creating two fall themed cards and two winter or Christmas themed cards, but I'm going to be doing 4 of each season sentiment so that I have a bunch to choose from. I'm using my Letterpress system, but again, you could foil these sentiments instead if you want. I typically like to do the sentiments with the Letterpress simply because I like the extra texture you get from heat embossing, but again, foil would look fabulous with this. Foil always looks great for holiday cards. So I'm going to pick my sentiments, put them on my Letterpress system, and I'm trying to space them so that I have enough space for my dies to go around them, so that I can die cut them all in one shot. You could put the sentiments a little bit closer if you wanted to fit more sentiments here, but there's a good chance you would have to die cut them in more than one pass through your die cutting machine because you can't have those dies overlapping each other. I used a little bit of embossing powder tool on my hammermill cardstock that I have taped to the clear plate on my Letterpress system, and then I inked my plates with some Versamark ink. Put the clear plate onto the base and ran it through my die cutting machine to press those sentiments right onto the cardstock. I am going to heat emboss them with some gold superfine embossing powder. Anytime I do press sentiments, if possible, I like to use superfine embossing powder because you just get so much more crisp detail with it. Once I have the embossing powder poured on there, I will tap the excess off and I'll use my heat tool to melt that powder on the cardstock. And you can really see when you're doing embossing, it goes from like a rough granular looking sentiment to a nice smooth metallic sentiment once it gets melted. If you by chance have any embossing powder where you don't want it to be, you definitely want to brush it off before heat embossing it because once it's melted onto the paper, you're not going to get it off anyway. So once we have these sentiments heat embossed, I'm going to let that cool down for 5-10 seconds, and then I'm going to match up the dies, and I do tape them in place with some Best Ever Craft tape. Those dies don't move on me while I'm cutting out those sentiments. So I did a couple of them on screen and I did the rest of them off screen. Once all of the sentiments have the dies matching them, you can put them through the die cutting machine to die cut that out. You could also use a trimmer just to create sentiment strips if you want, but die cutting is so much easier, and I like the look of the curved edges around the die cut sentiments. I think it just gives it an interesting look to it. So we have all of our sentiments here ready to go. I'm going to tuck those to the side. Now I created more sentiments than I really need for the cards that I'm creating. Any of the extra ones, I'll just put them in a little Ziploc bag, put them in the packaging with that set so they will not go to waste. They may work perfectly for an upcoming project that I use with that set. I'm going to start by using that Beep Beep base die set with the Beep Beep leaf peeper to create an autumn themed card. For my car, I've used the Ruby Treasured cardstock pack, and I've used some of the matte finish cardstock for my car. I love those Treasured cardstock pack or specialty cardstocks for doing cars like this. I just think it gives them a nice look, and it just gives it a nice finish. For the chrome pieces on the car, I'm using some silver mirror cardstock so that, again, we have that nice metallic finish. It just works perfectly for those cars. When you die cut with these dies, it does put an indent showing you where the upper pieces or the overlaying pieces are intended to go. So you can put the glue right on those pieces and then use the wax tipped tool from the handy tool set to lift up the pieces and place them. It makes it really easy for attaching these pieces. Now, the one thing to note about the specialty cardstocks is they have like a coating on the top of them that makes them non-porous. So the glue does take a little bit longer to dry. Sometimes when you put the glue on there, it also tends to curl just a little bit. So once I have all of my pieces laying properly, I do put an acrylic block on there holding everything down nice and flat while it's drying. Now, there is a license plate for the front of this, and with that Beep Beep leaf peeper set, there is a hello overlay to go on it, so I have that on there. I thought it was just an adorable thing to have that little word on there. There's also one for the holiday one that says Merry, so you can pick and choose which one you want. I'm going to have the little scarecrow here driving the car, and I'm going to have a couple of pumpkins right in its passenger seat. There's also some sunflowers in this set. I will use those sunflowers for my second fall card. For my second fall card, as well as my second winter card, I'm going to create them without the Beep Beep card die. I'm going to create cards without that just to show you a different alternative with them. So you have a few different options. Now you may have seen when I lifted up my card with all of my die cut pieces, there were a ton of die cut pieces there. So I kind of just divide them into different sections. I did my car first. I have that drying off to the side. The pumpkins themselves were quite easy because the only extra layer for them was the stem. And then we did the scarecrow, and I typically will lay out all of the pieces needed for that particular piece, and I will put them close to where they are intended to go and then just layer them on top of each other. I use the liquid glue in a fine line bottle, so it makes it really easy to layer those pieces together and move them if you need to. You can see that I put my hands on the scarecrow and then realized that I wanted his hands on the wheel for driving, so I was able to lift those up, and the glue had started setting, but it wasn't completely set, so it was easy enough to change that. Then I can put the scarecrow as well as the pumpkins in the car and work on our card base. I'm going to do a little bit of super simple ink blending right on that card base. Now you could do this on a separate paper and then, or cardstock, and then have it matted on the front of the card for something a little bit different. I don't often do it this way. I just thought it would be fun to just do this directly onto the card. I thought having a little bit of color in the background just kind of suited the die cuts. I didn't want it to be stark white, and I also didn't want it to be just a solid cardstock color. So I did a little bit of ink blending with some peeled paint, then I used fossilized amber, then some carved pumpkin, and then some aged mahogany. Again, all fall colors for this one, just to give it a little bit of color in the background, to soften that background up, and have just a nice background for our card to be sitting on. Once that ink blending is done, and you can see I didn't go all the way to the edges, I just wanted a hint of color, a hint of a background there. I'm gluing that car right on there, and then we can add one of our sentiments. So when I put these die cuts down, you can see that I don't really press them in place too much. That way, if I have to shift them up or down, I have the freedom to do that. Once I have everything done exactly how I want, then I'll put my acrylic block on there and hold that into place, making sure it has contact with the base while it dries. Now the one last step here, I wanted to add some glossy dome dimension to those headlights, so I added some glossy accents. Now that will take a little while to dry, so I'll put that aside and let that dry while I'm working on the next card. And for the next card, I'm using that Beep Beep die set with the Beep Beep holiday die to create a holiday card with it. For this one, for the card base, I used another Treasured Cardstock pack. This time I used the turquoise one, and I chose to use the pearl cardstock for the car, but the Treasured Cardstock packs have 5 different specialty paper finishes to them. So there is mirror cardstock, there is matte cardstock, there is brushed cardstock, there is glitter, and then there is pearl. So you have 5 different finishes to choose from. There are 3 sheets of each one of them, and the cardstocks go a long way. When you're using them, I will always save all of those extra little tiny bits, because often when I'm creating, sometimes I want just a teeny tiny die cut in specialty cardstock, and those scraps are perfect for die cutting those pieces. Just like the first one, I used the silver Treasured Cardstock or silver mirror cardstock for the chrome pieces. My tires are just out of a black cardstock, and then I use Beeswax Cardstock for those headlights. And again, we're adding the die cuts on there. And then once I have everything in place, I'll just put the acrylic block on there to hold everything nice and flat. So for this one here, we have another license plate going on top of it. This one, it says Mary, and I kept those teeny tiny bits for the centers of the R's, put the glue on the base piece where they're supposed to go, and just use that wax tip tool in order to lift those pieces in place and place them on there. So with our card done, I have the other pieces to go in the car set aside to assemble. We have our little reindeer. I did the ruby cardstock with the matte finish for its nose. I'm also using that same cardstock for Santa's hat as well as his suit. Now the reindeer is die cut out of some brown velvet cardstock, so it has a nice soft finish. I'm using white velvet cardstock for Santa's beard and mustache. I always love using different cardstock finishes when I'm creating, because that just gives you different places for your eye to catch, and it just gives the finished result a lot more interest, in my opinion. For the bows on those gifts, those ones are done with some gold pearl cardstock. And again, I'm just putting the glue on the base pieces of those and then layering those bow pieces on top of them. For our Santa, I have everything laid out kind of in order of how it's assembled. I have that base piece in the middle, and as I'm assembling, I just take one piece at a time or a couple pieces at a time, put them onto that base, and obviously as we're assembling more pieces, we have less pieces to go. When you're working on things like this, there are often so many pieces, it can get a little bit overwhelming, but by laying everything out ahead of time and taking the time to make sure that you have all of those pieces, it makes the assembly process go so much smoother, as well as the fact that you can see that you have all of the pieces there, and you're not rummaging through a pile of die cuts to get the pieces that you're needing for whatever it is you're assembling. Now, the one thing that I realized after the fact that I forgot to do here, there are teeny tiny itty bitty little die cuts for the eyes. I had intended to use a Posca pen to just draw in Santa's eyes there, and I realized after this video was done, my pictures were done, and I was putting the voiceover on there, I realized that I forgot to add the dots to it. I think if I hadn't even mentioned it, likely it wouldn't even be noticed unless it was compared to a different image somewhere. So again, I realized I forgot that, but it was, again, after everything was done, and I didn't want to redo everything at that point. So we should be having, or the Santa should have some more prominent eyes. And if you use those die cuts, they're really teeny tiny. A pen will also work here. So you can see as I'm assembling everything, I'm kind of going from front to back when it comes to adding things to the car. So first I added Santa and the deer, then I added those gifts behind, and you can see that while I'm doing this, those pieces are shifting and moving, and that's because I haven't let that glue set. I typically don't let it set until everything is exactly in place, exactly how I want it. Once everything is in place, I'll put my acrylic block on there, and then I'll set that aside and let that dry. For this background, I wanted it to be super, super simple, mostly white, but I thought it'd be fun if it has some sprinkling snow. So I used the sprinkle or sparkle splatter effects on that background, just added some splatter. It's really subtle, but when you tilt it into the light, that splatter has a little bit of a silver tone to it. So again, there's just some things on the background that catches your eye. Once I've let that dry for a little bit, and it doesn't take too long to dry, I want to say 30 seconds or a minute, we can add that card die cut to the front, and then we can add our sentiment to the bottom, and we'll let that dry for just a little bit. Now you could leave this as is if you want. There is so much texture here between that pearl cardstock, the velvet cardstock, the glitter cardstock, the gold and the ruby cardstock. But again, I thought having the little bit of glossy dome dimension on those headlights just finish it off really nicely. So I put the glossy accents on there. Then I also wanted to put some ornaments on that tree. So I'm using some gold Nouveau drops. Now that very first one that I did, it kind of spurted a little bit. So my little dot there ended up being a little bit bigger than I would have liked it to be. But using those dots makes it really easy to add ornaments. And they also have that domed dimension to them, giving them some extra texture. So I'll set that aside to dry while working on my next bit. Now you can see I had a ton of die cuts there. A lot of them were repeats from the last fall card, the scarecrow as well as the pumpkins. I have a bunch of sunflowers. I cut 2 of the sunflower heads, layered them on top of each other, put on the center, and then added the stem. So the sunflowers are really quite simple. I did most of them off screen and then just assembled one on screen there. Again, for the background for this, I'm going to do another super simple ink blended background right on my card base. I started with the peeled paint, then went with fossilized amber, then the carved pumpkin, and once again the aged mahogany. So the same colors that I used for the first fall card. This is just going to be a background. I'm going to create a bit of a scene with the sunflowers, with the scarecrow, as well as those pumpkins. So again, you don't necessarily need the Beep Beep base die. It is absolutely adorable with it, but you could use these pieces on their own to create a little bit of a scene, and it gives you just a few more options again. So I'm going to glue those sunflowers in the background, then I'm going to glue my scarecrow on, and then I'm going to have the pumpkins in the foreground. Now the sunflowers, I'm layering them kind of together randomly as if they were growing out in a field. I have them all die cut out of saffron cardstock, but you could do a variety of different yellow cardstocks if you wanted to have a bit of variety in their colors. And for the scarecrow, I did the same colors as the last one. Again, you can just pick and choose which pieces or which colors you want, what color scheme you want. I went with the typical fall color scheme just because I really like it for these particular die cuts. Now, I would have had those two side sunflowers kind of floating in the air. There's nothing to hold or to grow behind, so I added a couple of the small pumpkins there so it hides the end of the stem. Then added our 3 larger pumpkins, and I have them die cut out of carrot cardstock, beeswax cardstock, as well as terracotta cardstock. So we have a few different colors there. I just love doing them in a bunch of different colors, especially if you're having them all together. It just adds that bit of color variety. You could also do ink blending around them if you wanted to add a little bit more visual dimension that way. To add just a touch of sparkle, I put some stickles in the center of those sunflowers. Now the one that I used was iridescent, so you can still see that brown cardstock underneath there, but it just adds that extra little bit of texture and that extra little bit of sparkle. For my last card here, I have those gifts that I already assembled off screen because it's the same as the second card. I'm using some of the tree dies to create a little bit of a forest with some gifts on it. This die set, the Beep Beep Holiday die, has some lights to put on the tree. So I die cut for each one of those trees. I die cut 3 strings of those lights. And you can see that I chose a different color green than the base so that you can see those strings on there. I'm gluing those in place, and you can see when I glue them on, there's extra pieces on the side. Once the glue has set, I will trim those pieces off. Now there is a die to put the upper pieces of those lights on if you wanted to do them in a color. I'm going to do those same Nouveau drops on those pieces instead of adding the little teeny tiny die cuts. They're a little bit tedious to add those teeny tiny die cuts. And in my opinion, they're also a little bit flat simply because it's just a cardstock die cut. So by adding Nouveau drops, and they come in tons of different colors, you can add the different texture as well as the different finish, because the one that I'm using is the gold one. It has a pearl finish to it. It also has that domed dimension. And I just think it gives a little bit more of a presence on that tree than just a cardstock die cut would. So I don't even bother die cutting those little cardstock pieces. This is my little cheat, and I personally like it a little bit better. Not that there's anything wrong with those die cuts, but again, I love when we can add texture in different ways. For the background for this card, I have a piece of hammer mill cardstock trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I tore a piece of printer paper for my snow line, and then I'm using some tumble glass distress ink just to add a little bit of a sky color behind there. You could use some scissors if you wanted that snow line to be a little bit smoother. I personally like the organic look of torn paper for that, but either one would work perfectly here. I used some more of those sparkle splatter effects on that background to add some falling snow. I have some Fern cardstock here from a mat that's trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and you can see this is one of the pieces that I die cut my tree out of. Once we have our background on there plus those die cuts, you're never going to know anything was die cut out of it. So it's a great way to just extend your cardstock just a little bit, and no one would ever know until you do a video about it and tell them about it. So I'm going to put my 3 trees on the background there. I have my gifts to the side that I'm going to be putting at the base of the tree. And once I have all of those pieces assembled, then I will add the Nouveau drops on the lights on the tree. This way, if there's some that happen to be covered by a tree that goes over top of it, I don't have to worry about it. Another thing is I typically do it last so that I can set it aside to dry and don't accidentally touch something that's wet, because I typically will touch the something that is wet if there is opportunity for it. So typically I'll do something like that, and I'll tuck it to the side where I can't touch it, or I'll leave the room so that I don't touch it. Once we have all those die cuts on there, we can add the sentiment, and I put it towards the top. I end up changing my mind and adding another sentiment towards the bottom, so that we have one at the top and one at the bottom. In between that, I do put those Nouveau drops on the lights. And again, it adds that little bit of extra texture. And these come in a ton of different colors, so you can change up the colors. If you wanted them to be red so that those lights were a little bit more visible, that absolutely would work as well. So I just put as much on there as to cover the base part of that light. And I just love the extra texture that it gives. So I added that sentiment to the bottom. I'll let that completely dry. And here is the finished card. Now you'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. So if there's something that I've forgotten to mention, you'll likely find that information down there. Otherwise, just ask and I will happily tell you what you need to know. So here is the second card with that Beep Beep leaf paper die set. And again, without the Beep Beep die, so you have another option for using it. I love when we have base die sets with lots of different accessory pieces that you can customize with lots of different options. It just makes it so much fun for creating and customizing things and just creating exactly what you want to create. And I love the look of the glossy accents on the headlights. I think it just adds that extra bit of texture to the fronts of those cards. This is such an adorable collection and it does create such adorable seasonal cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.